Good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining me on this hot and sunny day. I think that the technical issues have melted my laptop away, so sorry for this short delay. The sun has got to my laptop, but we are here. Um, Welcome to the webinar on diversity, equality and inclusion in financial services. Are you ready for the new regulatory changes? Next slide, please. My name's Nicola Christofides and I am delighted to be your host today. I'm Assistant Director here at Complyport and I head up the Financial Crime and Operation Resilience function. And I'm also deeply committed and passionate to promote diversity, equality and inclusion. In previous roles, I was also chair of the Global Diversity Committee at Barclays Compliance for 5 years, where I implemented many changes across the organisation. I was also corporate responsibility executive sponsor. I am an unconscious bias personal trainer, and I am also a diversity, equality and inclusion executive and board trainer. Next slide, please. Today on this agenda, we are going to go through 5 parts, and hopefully this will help you and your firm prepare for the changes that are going to come in due to the consultation that is going to be made into rules at the end of this year. We are going to go through introduction, key themes, non-financial misconduct, diversity and inclusion strategy and monitoring, and also the senior managers and certification regime, SCMR. Next slide, please. We're now going to embark on part 1. It's the CP 2320 and the FCA objectives, which I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with. So the DE&I financial sector has changed a lot in the last few years. I'd say it has changed and it's been progressively better. However, as you can see on the slide, there is a lot of way to go. There's only 2 out of 20 that were surveyed that are women in financial services firms. That's not hardly any, and firms need to get better, which we'll talk about going forward. There's only 4 out of 200 surveys that are actually in the board, and so the ones are senior executives in financial services firms. Only 9 out of 200 CEOs come from a social economic background. And when people tend to think of diversity, they think of the gender. But now the FCA and PRA are looking at all-encompassing different factors of diversity, equality, inclusion, which is music to my ears, because it's not just about women, it's not just about men. There's lots of different things that factor in diversity, equality, inclusion. It's really important that the PRA and the FCA have really taken notice, and there was a government-backed Parker review, which I would encourage you to look at, that was set this year, and it looked at FTSE 500, FTSE 250 organisations, and what they said is that there should be a target of at least 1 ethnic minority board member by the end of 2024, because as you can imagine, at the moment there is such a low representation on boards of those ethnic minority. There are currently only 12 ethnic minority CEOs in the FTSE 100. That is up from 7 in 2022. But as you can imagine, we're still nowhere near, where we should be. And this is why the CP that is coming out, that is going to go into rules, is going to be so important for the changes that are going to be set in firms. I'd also like to touch on the gender pay gap. And even though I said it wasn't about men and women, the pay gap is 12% compared to 27%. So 12% for women and 27 men. So there's a huge that disparity between. We still get paid a lot lower than our counterparts in the financial services industry. Next slide, please, Faith. So the context. So as I just touched on, the FCA has published the CP 2320, and before that there was a discussion paper, and all firms were invited to respond and to give their feedback on the FCA's 3-year strategy to accelerate the changes. And also some of you may have received, and some of our clients did, a lot of them did, the non-financial misconduct survey that was sent to firms at the beginning of this year, 2024. At the same time as the FCA published their CP, the PRA also jointly published their own proposals, and they simultaneously published this. And whenever the regulators have done that, it means that they mean business. This is going to be hard setting rules that they're going to want to enforce in firms. And it's really important to take note, and it's important that, there's a lot of industry noise about this CP. And the reason we wanted to do this for you guys is because it's not something that you just think, oh, it's diversity, it's not going to affect us. It will affect you. And we'll see later on in the webinar how it's going to affect you and why the regulators have got such a focus on it. Next slide, please. Thank you. The objectives that the FCA are setting is that they want a more inclusive firms for diversity, equality and inclusion. And the Executive Director, Sheldon Mills from the FCA, he said that diversity, equality, inclusion lays the foundation to all statutory objectives. And when firms have a healthy culture and they have diversity at all thought levels and staff feel more able to raise concerns and speak up, it's more about the psychological safety of the employees. And this makes firms better equipped to tackle groupthink, improve decision making at all stages of the organisation, and ultimately strengthen the risk management of the firm. And it enables all sorts of problems to be remedied at an early stage before they might develop into regulatory breaches with negative impacts for consumer protection, market integrity, and competition interests of consumers. Secondly, when thinking of DE&I, the FCA have said, and with peer groups as well, that if firms have diverse perspectives, it enables all voices to be heard, and they are more likely to deploy innovative products and services. And that's really important. And some people don't link the diversity inclusion to their products they sell consumers, but the FCA and the PRI have seen huge linkages. And thirdly, how diverse and inclusion in a firm it impacts how people understand the firm that they are dealing with. And with the firm's greater understanding, it will be better equipped to provide products and services that cater for a diverse consumer base and compete for business. Because if the firm is culturally a their diversity inclusion, the thought of the employers that are actually thinking about the products, it will come through to their consumers, and that's the linkages they have made. And if you've read the CP, that's included in there heavily. Also supporting the FCA and Sheldon Mills on his messaging regarding this CP, Gareth Turan, who's the executive at the Bank of England, he said that improving diversity inclusion can support the internal governance within firms. And it's true, the corporate governance of a firm will have better decision making and better risk management. And they clearly support the primary objectives to support the safety and soundness of regulated firms, to contribute to the protection of firms and the insurance policyholders. It's up to each firm to have their own solutions. And that's what the PRA and FCA have said when we embark on this CP and the final rules, that it has to be proportionate, but the objectives and what they're setting has to be come through as a solution led for each firm. It's each firm's responsibility. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at part 2, which is the key themes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there's 6 proposals here for the CP 2320. And as you can see there, we've listed them out. And regulators have said the large firms are obviously at the top of the pyramid, and they're defined as those who have 251 or more employees and are subject to a full regulatory regime, including elements that smaller firms may not need to apply for. So I'll start off with the larger firms, talking about that, and then we'll go on to the smaller firms. So large firms would need to set targets for themselves to address underrepresentation in their firms, and that across a range of characteristics. And these are the proposals that I'm going through and what the FCA and PRA have commented on. But believe you me, we have spoken to many people in the industry and that the regulators. And we are very, very confident that some of these are going to be published in the rules. So it's really time to start thinking about them, because they are proposing that firms would have the freedom to prioritize the areas where they think that progress is needed. So really looking themselves at, diversity inclusion within firms and what needs to be done and where they could make a big difference. But broadly, expect firms to set at least one target for each of the board, senior leadership, and employee population to drive the change, to actually have objectives amongst the firm and amongst all its employees and senior management. And they may choose to set inclusion as a target, but it's, it's up to them whether they think it's diverse characteristics, whether it's going to be it will go wider than just sex. It might be disability. It could be all different things that they may feel that the data on that is proven in the firm is extremely low. And this could encompass religion, sexual orientation, and what they are saying is they are asking firms to collect that data in the firms on a voluntary basis. So they're going to say at first on a voluntary basis, but they're saying to firms that, can you collect the data? You have a look at your data yourselves. And the things such as, the socioeconomic background is really important because as we saw, those that are senior management usually come from a socioeconomic background. And why is that? And they want them to start collecting data, on that. They are going to be looking for the larger firms to submit that data to them. And what they have said in the first year, they will be lenient, and they will ask you to submit it, but it won't be stringent. But thereafter, you need to start making seriously structure and streamline with regards to your data collection on your firms for the following year. And they are looking to publish that report of aggregate data across the firm and across the industry so it can be easily compared against peers. And I think that is very much welcomed. And finally, for larger firms, proposing additional guidance to make clear that the lack of diversity and inclusion is a non-financial risk. And this is really important because the non-financial risk could affect groupthink, leading to decision making. It could be adversely impacting their customers, and this is an area where they really think that full flexibility is needed and how they embed that within the firms. Other requirements for smaller firms, fewer than 251 employees that we have noted on the slide, is that in addition to big firms, the smaller firms, which could include Solvency II firms, we're going to be required to establish and implement and maintain inclusion strategies. So whereas before smaller firms may not have had a diversity inclusion strategy, they will be now required to have one. And this they feel that is going to help support them as a smaller firm and support their customers that they they offer their products to. Also for the boards as well. So smaller firms still have boards, so they really feel that this will support them. So it's going to be time to start thinking about your strategies in your firms and what you're going to set if you don't have them. They will also talk about the strategies actually being published on websites. So the regulators have said, and there has been talk about it, that it may be in one of the rules that eventually your DE&I strategies will have to be published on your website for customers to be able to see, and also competitors as well. Next slide, please. So environmental, social, and governance, it's really important that you look at this as part of DE&I as well, because FCA evidence suggests that a diversity of perspectives together with an inclusive culture results in stronger judgments. And some here we've detailed down in this slide. It could be to do with product governance, the customer journey, quality of service, and client communications. The FCA challenged whether firms can sufficiently respond to client needs if they do not have diversity of background and experience to overcome an unconscious bias. And I said to you earlier that I deliver training on unconscious bias, and it's a real thought-provoking subject, and it's something that the regulators are really now looking into and are using the language a lot about unconscious bias. And I would encourage firms to invest in the training you do on that and to really think about unconscious bias, because it's extremely important when we're now going to be implementing the diversity and inclusion strategies going forward. Okay, can we go on to the next slide, please? Inclusion. So obviously, in addition to the workforce, the FCA expects the firms to be inclusive. And as I've said before, this begins with the culture, and the FCA and the PRA have said that it's the foundations. The culture is the foundations of all firms. And the governance, so how the senior managers foster the governance and the culture is really important. So that group think, when you're discussing at all your meetings, when you're discussing at the board. And what they said was that in 2000, 2008, when the financial crisis happened, that there wasn't diversity in the senior management, that they felt that even themselves looking reflectively at the FCA, that people were not able to challenge the senior management at the time. And what they felt was that in that financial crisis, the firms that really did suffer, that the senior management were just taking those decisions, and it was seen that there was not voices. So those that are more junior and that were lower down, they were not able to speak up, and they felt that that is a culture. That's because of the culture of the firm, and they really want that never, obviously, to happen again. So they feel that the diversity, equality, and inclusion strategies that the firm set will help that. It will help ensure that nothing like 2008 happens again, because people will have a voice. The nurturing environment, which I've just spoken to, as well. So that's something they've been reflective on 2008 and why they want to do this CP and the final rules. Obviously, the conduct rules was a huge implementation that come out a few years ago, and that was to do with non-financial misconduct and to do with the culture of the firm. And the evidence that they are looking is the firm's whistleblowing procedures. So they say that this is if they are being used, it means that there's a healthy culture within the firm, because the firm, employees can speak up. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide. Thank you. So non-financial misconduct, and we've noted down here the FCA proposals, and I think that it's really important for me to highlight that this would apply to a firm of any size. It's not limiting the scope of firms, and it's that the proposals aim to clarify expectations about how firms should address non-financial misconduct. And this is intended to support firms to take decisive action against employees engaging in serious adverse behaviour such as bullying and harassment, which runs counter to the kinds of healthy and inclusive cultures that the regulators want to see, where these types of behaviours will not be tolerated. And they want also firms to foster an environment where other types of misconduct will not go, will not be tolerated and will not go unchallenged. Because if they are not going unchallenged, it creates that culture in the firm, which is not something the regulators want. And what they're proposing is they're going to explicitly include the non-financial misconduct in both fitness and propriety assessments, the conduct rules, and alter the suitability threshold as well. And on fitness and propriety, they propose to explain that bullying and other similar misconduct in the workplace is relevant to F&P assessments. And similarly, serious behaviours in personal private lives are also relevant. So how you conduct yourself at work, how you conduct yourself outside, will possibly, in the final rules, be in the fitness and proprietary assessments. So it's really something to think of, and all staff are really going to have to think about that and conduct themselves in a way in and outside of work. And what they are saying is that the conduct rules that are currently there could possibly be expanded. And the conduct rules, obviously, as you all know, because I'm sure you've had training on them and are all well aware, are a foundation as well for the non-financial misconduct in firms. And it really sets accounts to those who are in the firms and also the line managers to actually have breaches where conduct rules are breached. And what they want to do is make this expand this even more to include instances of behaviour of employees. And again, this is because they feel that this goes to the culture of the firm. Thank you. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. So it's the setting the DE&I with all firms of 251 and more. And so like I said, it will apply to larger firms, but they will expect smaller firms to set the internal DE&I strategy. It's unsure whether this will have to be published like the larger firms at first, but they are going to definitely include the non-financial misconduct. They will be setting probably the fitness and proprietary, so that it was going to be included in that, and also the private life being tagged into the fitness and proprietary as well. So that will also be for smaller firms. So it's really important that, like I said, that everybody takes note of that. Can we have the last slide, please? So DE&I monitoring. So what will you need to do to internally monitor? You need to look at your DE&I policies, and where necessary, you need to prompt intervention. So as soon as you see an issue, as soon as you see something that possibly needs extra work on, please intervene. The reviews that they're proposing, the regulators will be on an annual basis, submissions will be on an annual basis, data collection will be on an annual basis. And obviously for smaller firms, it's going to be proportionate to the size and the complexity of the business. So please don't worry if you're a smaller firm on this webinar and you're thinking that everything I've spoken to, it will apply to you. It may, but it will be proportional. And that's something that, it will be, I think, definitely detailed in the rules that when they come out. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide. So this is our last part before we sum up and before we finish. And it's really important. So SMCR, all of you know, some of you probably hold SMF functions on here and have statement responsibilities. And I've mentioned here that one of the key things that they're proposing for larger firms is to have their data reported around employee characteristics. And they need to think of what assurance are they going to give to their employees around the data that's going to be used. And I think that's something for the board. They're going to be setting that because I'm sure employees do not want, if they submit questionnaires regarding their personal representation, they do not want that being how is that going to be captured? How is that going to be stored? And that's something that the actual company are going to set. And I'm sure the senior managers will be looking into that as well. And I think that it's just really important that the statement of responsibilities that are set for your SMF functions, they have said will probably include DE&I in it, where that has not been mandatory before, they probably will be in there. Obviously, they're going to have targets on conduct rules, on breaches, but there'll be a number of things that will be included now. And you can see down there, we've put about the fitness and proper test on how it's going forward. It's really going to affect your SMCR roles. And it's really going to be something that you need to think of and plan going forward because once it's published in the rules, obviously you'll have a time of leniency to do that. But it's better to be prepared. We're already nearly at July. They're looking to publish, I think they said at the end of 2024, so we're only a few months away. So it's really important to really look at your strategies that you have, how you're going to change them, how you're going to look at your statement of responsibilities and prepare for it coming forward. I think also it's really important, for us firms, consultants, that let's be that step forward. Let's be part of that dial moving DE&I and be prepared. And it's for all of us to be prepared to do that. I think that one way that you can be prepared is making sure everybody is up to speed with diversity, inclusion, and quality training. It's something that is delivered widely, and I think it's good for the board. It's also good for senior management. It's also good for employees as part of their training plan. The strategic planning, so make sure that you have people represented on your strategic planning for DE&I amongst your firms. It's something that you can, that we help firms with setting the strategy for DE&I. You can do it yourselves with the appropriate people. Make sure you have a selection of people to do that. And then also, your DE&I policies, make sure that they're drafted, that they are up to date, that they include any regulatory information that they're new to in there. And so also that your employees are well aware of that. And it's up to the board and the senior management to set the tone from the top, and I always say that when it comes to this subject, but it's really important that they do, and it's really important that you show your employees that you're doing something about this, and that you are preparing for the changes to come in, and when those changes are needed, that you act on them and you communicate widely to your firm, because the sense of involvement there will also foster a positive culture within your firm. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you. I've whizzed through a lot of information there. I hope you found that useful. It was a snapshot to really highlight the importance of diversity and quality inclusion and the actual changes that are going to happen at the end of this year. Please do get in touch if you have any questions. We don't have any time for questions right now, but please do if you get any questions. Also contact me on ways if we can help you. If you need any help with your strategies, your training, your policies, we're here here, we're well experienced in doing that. And really, share this in webinar with your employees, share this webinar with the firm. It's we touch on some important points in here. This will form part of a training if you do, and really obviously keep up to date with those conduct rules training. And non-financial misconduct training that you do at the firm, because it's really important. And the regulators will be looking at that when you do your reg submissions as well, when they come into implementation. It's been a pleasure for me today. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to me. Get in touch if you have any questions, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.